In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
We're here again on your YouTube channel. It's Just Plus Play with Ell and Trey.
You're Elle, and I'm Trey.
That's correct.
We're very grateful to have with us Jared Hill, who is a correspondent for CBS News and Stations. He's actually in Philly, where the presidential debate was being held. And essentially, from the perspective of a journalist who covers politics and is there to cover this debate, I think the main mission of this episode for us, being a podcast that celebrates and explores the lives and the interests of the BIPOC community, the queer BIPOC community, basically black shit and queer shit. We want to put things into perspective for our audience to really stress the ways that the presidential election actually matters in terms of the way that it has the potential to impact us specifically and the lives of Americans in general. And so I'm excited to really dive into this because what a wild ride that was, huh?
That was a very wild ride. What would you say?
It was.
How would you say, how would you describe your initial emotion? Just, thinking about today all day that one, you would be there in Philadelphia, and two, you would be just watching and gaining things and gaining perspective. Were you nervous? Were you excited?
I was, like a lot of people, had feelings of heavy anticipation. So what was this going to look like? Because on paper, at the end of the day, Vice President Kamala Harris kind of had more to gain and lose tonight. We know a lot about former President Trump. He's someone who has been in office for 4 years. He had been on television for many, many years before that. And so we know who he is politically and individually. She had a lot of work to do to define herself as a candidate and as a person. And also to kind of prove on a debate stage like this, again, this is her first debate. It was his seventh debate, presidential debate, that she could command this type of stage literally and figuratively. And so the question going into this was, will she be able to showcase that she has a command over the role of commander-in-chief? And I think one of the interesting things watching this tonight was she did succeed at that. Did we get a lot of strong policy from her? Did we get a lot of strong information from her in terms of maybe what the Biden administration could have done better, reasons that she has adjusted on some of her policy points? Not so much. But also, when it comes to a debate, that's not oftentimes what people are really looking for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They typically are an hour and a half of vibes. And it seems as though she was able to deliver on the vibe of being in control.
Yeah. How does that compare to what your expectations were?
So watching some of her previous interviews, and it is true that she hasn't done a ton, especially not as the new Democratic nominee. I didn't really expect her to go into a lot of detail. She did release policy on her website just a couple of days ago, something that people had been asking for. It wasn't really that surprising that she hadn't released it, because the second that you tell people your plans, it's that much easier to attack them line by line, which we did see J.D. Vance do, the vice presidential candidate for Republicans. He did that on his Twitter. That's not something that we saw former President Trump do on the stage. So again, going back to the expectations, she, typically speaking, doesn't really focus that much on the minutia of policy. She did kind of throw out some of the broader strokes of her policy proposals during tonight's debate. But again, the real goal, it seemed like, for her was to try and bait former President Trump into getting flustered, something that we had heard from some of the Harris team going into this, is that she was studying not only her own stuff, but she was studying what gets him rattled, what makes him fidget in previous debates. And it seemed as though she took those notes and was able to execute pretty well.
I feel like just for me, like listening to him, I feel like, you get these big clocks says 2 minutes. And every single time that he would get baited into like these ramble sessions of people that support him, who he likes, the crowd size.
Yeah, people leaving his rallies.
Dart around about like immigration, then about like just all the way around the question. And I want to give everybody a fair opportunity. Yes, she didn't, Kamala didn't have a lot of policies out and out, but I don't think that we heard one real policy with facts and statistics and some framework of how it would look from Trump's campaign. And it's weird to me because I feel like I watched the news from the last 5 days, how every news reporter and news journalist said oh, this is her plan. You would think that his camp would see that and be like, hey, when you go out there tonight, I need you to not to say stupid people.
So, I mean, I totally agree that he also didn't come with a lot of hard policy either. And there were places where he can go after Vice President Harris in a way that is focused on policy and focused on her track record. Immigration is one in particular where he would kind of dip his toe in actual immigration policy, but then veer off into either conspiracy theory or conjecture in a way that didn't really help his cause, which again is why I say that the goal of these debates at this point isn't necessarily for them to figure out, who has the best hardcore plan for America, but who can showcase that they're the best leader for the country. And she was able to, for whatever reason tonight, really get under his skin and veer him away from talking about policy and talking about some of the shortcomings in her policies.
Yeah, I was actually quite relieved because it seemed very clear to me early on that this wasn't going to be a situation like we saw in previous debates from the last election or the one prior, where Donald Trump just used lies and rhetoric to steamroll over a lot of his opponents. Because while there wasn't a dense amount of policy conversations from either side, I do think that right off the bat, she came out talking about the child tax credit. And I was just relieved to see that at the very least, it wasn't going to be a situation where Donald Trump somehow finds a way to just derail the conversation completely. And like you said, I do think that she showed that she can go toe-to-toe to him, and not even go toe-to-toe, but dominate. Yeah.
I think that was one of the things that was going to be the question, and there's the possibility that the muted microphones helped her with this one. And we know that she did not want the muted microphones to be put in place, but that's what they agreed upon. There's a possibility that worked in her favor and against former President Trump, because he wasn't able to literally steamroll the conversation because he had to stop at a point and he couldn't kind of jump in when and if he felt like he needed to. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, do you feel like, I think one of the main concerns for, I guess, most citizens, just because I think this is the first time in history there's been such a switch in tickets, do you feel like Kamala introduced herself once again outside of the DNC, was able to introduce herself and tell the American people who she is and what she stands for, and really make a separation between Biden, who she currently works for, that's kind of her boss right now, and then what her plans is?
Yes and no. So, I mean, one of the interesting things, and I think that this is kind of good for her, frustrating for journalists, is that she does what some people do in job interviews, right? Where they ask you a question and you answer a question you wish you asked that they had asked you. And so she would kind of flip some of those questions and use it as an opportunity both to introduce herself in terms of her biography, her personal biography, her professional biography, and her plans for policy. She was able, I think, to successfully pivot with a lot of those questions and introduce herself to American voters who, again, wouldn't have been watching the DNC because presumably they aren't either hardcore Democrats or they weren't interested in watching 4 days of the DNC. I think that she was successful in presenting herself. It'll be interesting to see what some of the polling looks like over the next couple of days after the debate, because we know about 30% of American voters, according to, I believe it was a New York Times poll, were saying that what they really wanted was to learn more about who Kamala Harris was. They just didn't really know who she was. And so this was a perfect opportunity for her to do so. We saw repeated moments in which she would go through her biography as someone who grew up in a middle-class household with a single mother, somebody who she says, really worked as a prosecutor to fight for people. And so she hit a lot of those notes, and she hit them fairly early on in the debate, which is typically the time that most people are watching before they tune out because it's too late on Tuesday night. And so I think that she did do a good job at that. The question will be if the folks who really matter, those undecided voters or those voters who were on the fence about getting off the couch and going to the polls on Election Day, if they learned enough about her and that was enough to actually send them to go vote.
Something I was seeing a lot about is like the performance of the moderators. And I think I do want to give credit that I think it takes a lot of preparation to actually fact check someone on things that you don't know that they're going to say. I did also see some criticism that it felt like there was only fact checking on things that Trump said as opposed to Kamala. Do you have?
Because he lied the most. He lied.
It's like, if you're the one lying, you're the one who gets fact checked, right?
Not that I don't think anyone ever goes in saying like, you can kill a baby after they're born.
They have abortion in the 9th month. They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, who's doing an excellent job, but the governor before, he said the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that, and that's definitely a criticism that I've seen from the Trump campaign that they're using a lot of. The Trump campaign as well as Trump supporters this evening are saying basically this was a 3-on-1 debate. And so they're punting a lot to the moderators being the reason they feel that maybe he didn't do as well as he could, although they won't out loud say that he didn't do as well as they believe that he should have. I think one of the differences between someone like former President Trump and someone like Vice President Harris, and also this is similar with Joe Biden, President Biden, is that you get into a place of sort of nuanced mistruths versus very easily checkable false statements or lies. And so I think that it can be easier to say, no, this is wrong versus, well, maybe actually it's this percentage and not that percentage. And so I think that sometimes that can be the difficulty in doing a live fact check for people who are as different as these two are.
Tonight, do you really think, this is just a funny question, former President Trump was asked, like, how would you handle war with Ukraine and Russia? And I think part of his response was, I'll call them both up and I'll have it done before I'm president, but after I'm president. My question to you is, do you think he's going to get it done before or after or tonight? Or do you think he can text them? How do you think this would look?
There's a lame duck period between the election and the inauguration where, like, technically speaking, the new president is not yet in power. But he's basically saying, I've had enough connection with these folks. I got their number. After the election, I would call them up and say, hey, I'm going to be president in January. Let's fix X, Y, and Z. Can that happen? Who knows? There's a lot of posturing that happens right during these debates. There are a lot of plans that are laid out that you either need Congress to enact or won't actually happen. Could it happen? Who knows? But he's basically saying that he has the connections, he has the relationships already on day one to start getting work done, and making an argument that the vice president does not have those connections and that ability.
He said that she doesn't have a plan. I have one more last question. I know that Kamala came out and she said, Joe, he's going to lie all night and he's going to push, the border crisis. And he did. My question is, do you think that the many Americans that do blame Kamala for the issues on the southern border, do you think they're going to understand a bipartisan bill and really accept the answer of, hey, we had a plan, but it was shot down out of the air because he needed something to run on that's significant? Or are they going to continue to be like, she can't do her job? Because I believe that let's be honest, a vice president kind of is like an invisible person. It's like the people that sing backup, but they're there.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, depending on the White House you're working in, a vice president can be sort of even less than that. They're there to basically support the wills and the policies of the president, but they're not making policy themselves. So a background singer, sometimes you'll hear them sing too loud, and you'll know, the soprano in the back is
Singing my part.
doing
She's
something.
singing my part.
But like
She's about to get sent
usually,
home.
a vice president wouldn't do that because that's not what they do, and that becomes murky. I think that's going to be one of the challenges, right, for Vice President Harris, is trying to convince people, one, the job that they say that I had isn't the job that I actually had. And so I could have never fixed the southern border because my job was actually to help with what's happening in Northern Triangle countries, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. And so one of the big challenges is like, will people pay enough attention to the policy of that, to the government aspect of that? Or will they say, yeah, but I feel this way. This is how I feel. I feel as though you're responsible. I'm not going to vote for you. She's got, 55 days left to convince people, and that's not including early voting, which in some states will start as early as this month. One of the things that people have said has been a detriment to Vice President Harris in not kind of getting out there on television in a way is that she's allowed for the Republican Party to define her without defining herself. And so, again, she has a lot of work to do to make up in that respect. People knew who former President Trump was going into tonight's debate. They didn't know her as well. Can she continue to make the case for herself over the next couple of weeks, if not months? That's going to be the question.
I think that she can, because the one thing about, I guess, the strategy, hopefully her camp has, like, to take it and take every little piece of it in strides and make it really important. I feel like Trump has always done all these like weird rallies at like auto parts and nearly getting shot and conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory. It's important that people take in consideration that Kamala is like sitting down, trying to think about what she's going to say and make sure that it makes sense for the American people, and that's also something that they can understand, versus to do, thing after thing. Although not doing any interviews and not answering any questions, even when she's like leaving out of her little plane and stuff, it's kind of like, it's late. I don't think anyone joins the race this late in the game.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe a strategy, maybe one that works. I do wonder how much, based on the debate, how much you think that this will actually impact the way people are going to vote.
Black voters.
Yeah. So I think, generally speaking, and I only preface that because after the last debate or before the last debate, I would have been like, debates don't matter. But obviously that one did. Generally speaking, debates don't do a lot to like really sway people, especially if you already feel like you are going to support somebody. It just reaffirms your notions of how you felt before. What they're hoping for in this is, again, to mobilize folks who are on the fence about voting in general, especially in these swing states, because they're going to need, either party needs as many people as possible in their camp to turn out to vote as possible. So either this will help to motivate people who were already soft on Kamala, who were like, okay, I feel it now, I'll go vote. Or some of those independent swing voters who were not sure about who they're going to go for. Based on what I saw tonight, and again, I think it's going to be interesting to see what some of the polling looks like coming out of this, she did not hurt herself. And I think for someone who was as new as she was, that was the big concern. Was Kamala Harris going to do something that hurt her chances with those undecided voters or those voters who were soft on going out to the polls? She didn't hurt herself. And so now she just has space to continue gaining ground, it seems. We know that the Harris campaign, at least out loud, is saying that they want to have a second debate. Does she need to have a second debate? Maybe not, because she actually did do pretty well this time around.
Yeah, child, I wouldn't.
I wouldn't. But
I'd be
you know
like, that's
what?
enough. Y'all heard him.
It was for me,
Yeah.
like you were over here, you had your notes and your like keyboard. I was like feeling like this is the best like satire stand up I've ever watched on television, as far as two important people talking about really important stuff and then one person being like unhinged. And
Yeah.
not really
Taking the bait
taking the bait
every time.
And I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
First, let me respond as to the rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics.
And that's one of the big reasons that there was at least, short chatter about like, she don't need to do anything else. This is it. She's good. You got your win. Don't come back and potentially get a loss. Because we know that that's always a possibility. But the campaign has already said that they, at least verbally, would like to do another debate. We'll
on
see if that
Fox
happens.
TV. They're not gonna let it happen on like NBC, or they're gonna let it happen like this anymore. Like it did feel like, but they use a lot of Trump's like wording. They use everything that he's already said and asked him about it. Like you. It's almost like it was soundbite after soundbite to use to compare to things you've said in the last 6 months. Like to sit there and say, oh, will you veto any bill that comes across your desk for abortion? And he didn't answer that. Just like he didn't answer like that racist question in 2016 where like, can you denounce racism? He was like,
Or the Proud Boys, or
I don't
January
know nothing about
6th.
that. It was
Which,
weird.
I mean, to be fair, if you're going to be if you're a presidential candidate and you want to win as many people over who might vote for you as possible and not alienate any of your potential voting base, you're going to make really vague statements about like, that's not even possible. I'm not going to answer this question because it's not a possibility. So vote for me.
Yeah. That's what he said.
Going to do. Yeah. And so, I mean, that was an interesting thing to watch tonight. I think that it was a bit surprising at how much he took the bait when she would offer it to him. Because it was telegraphed that was something that she was likely going to do.
Yeah. And then she laughed
but again,
in
so
his
the question
face.
is going to be if they do another debate and if he's going to push to have it on a different network. We know that we have the vice presidential debate coming up on October 1st on CBS. And so that's going to be something to watch to see if J.D. Vance tries to be a bit sharper in his attacks on their policy proposals. Because, again, we didn't really see former President Trump going after the policy really that much. A lot of it was about the feeling of Vice President Harris. And so that might be an opportunity.
Yeah, no, that was another thing that was really surprising to me. It was when they asked about abortion, and it was like, oh, well, me and J.D. Vance haven't even really discussed abortion policy. I'm like, okay,
J.D.
this
Vance
is
said
the
he
number
would
one.
do that.
Yeah, I mean,
You didn't talk to him?
it's one of the top issues in the country right now, and y'all haven't even discussed it.
Because your running mate, J.D. Vance, has said that you would veto it if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with J.D. in all fairness.
And you talk about President Biden and Vice President Harris not being in the same room or yet being in the same room. It's always back and forth. But you're saying right now you haven't talked to a man that went on national television and said, like, yes, he would veto it. Absolutely. He's always been firm about not supporting it. I don't know what he said, but it was weird.
It was weird.
Yeah,
The whole thing,
yeah.
they were very weird.
Those are always those interesting questions because you don't know how much of that is the candidate deflecting and saying, well, I haven't shared my exact feelings on this exact issue. How much of it is they actually haven't had a conversation about this? How much of it is, him being flustered on the stage in the moment? But I think the big picture for me was that it did not seem as though former President Trump was comfortable on the stage or in himself over the course of the hour and a half long debate. The beginning, I think he was actually pretty spot on when it comes to his arguments about the current state of the economy, kind of why haven't you done things over the past 3 years, the issue with tariffs and the Biden administration keeping a lot of the Trump era tariffs. But once they moved away from that and started getting to everything from abortion to immigration, he kind of lost control of both the debate writ large and himself over the night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any other overall takeaways? Anything that stood out to you? Or closing thoughts?
I think the other thing is, generally speaking, so we were kind of talking at the beginning of the conversation about the importance of an election and not just kind of the ins and outs of a debate. And I think something that's interesting and always a reminder is that for as much as this is about the top of the ticket, right, as much as this is about who wins the presidency, the vice presidency, there are so many other down ballot races that are really close, in particular when it comes to control of the Senate and the House, that are going to require people to turn out and vote. And so even if you are not interested in what's happening with the presidential ticket, or if you are interested in the presidential ticket, but that's the only thing you're paying attention to, also really pay attention to what's happening on some of those down ballot races, because as we're seeing these candidates crisscross the same 7 battleground states, because those are the ones that really matter for them, there are also in those same states, in particular Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, these really, really, really close Senate elections. And again, with a 50-50 split Senate, Vice President Harris moving out of the Senate, presumably if she becomes the president, there's going to be the need to make sure that whoever you want to win, however you think that Congress should move, that you pay attention to those races as well, making sure that you know if in your state, in your district, there is a member of a certain party that you think should stay in Congress or should be in Congress. Make sure you're paying attention to those races too, because those are the ones that really end up having a huge impact on what legislation makes it to the desk of the president. Because at the end of the day, especially when you're talking about the federal government, Congress puts the laws together, the president signs them.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
That's a lot of education. I learned a
Right?
lot now.
The girls are going to learn from this one.
They're going to learn from this one. We are doing our part.
Yes.
I hope so.
Thank you for watching another episode of Just Press Play with Ell and Trey. Stay tuned for part 2 of our conversation with even more colorful commentary about our favorite moments and takeaways from the debate. Stay tuned. Bye-bye now. And stop.